Ladies and gentlemen, what's going on? My name is TJ Sterling. I'm the CEO of Ray Comics, and I am here with the Schaumburg Black Comic Book Festival 11th Annual. We're here with three top dogs, amazing animation creators, gentlemen of all kinds and sorts. The panel that we have today is called Black in Animation. This is a pre-recorded panel, so if you have any questions, or thoughts on the panel, please drop them in the chat or reach out to each one of these gentlemen individually on their social media channels, which we'll be dropping at the very end of the stream. So thank you so much for joining us. Gentlemen, Carl Jones, Phillip Boutte Jr., and Chase Conley are in the building, y'all. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us.
Hello. My honor.
Thank you for the invite, bro. It's a good company.
Yes, sir.
Absolutely, man. Guys, there's so much star power in this room. You know, each individually, you guys have done some really, really amazing things in the animation space to really push the needle forward for our culture as a whole in terms of just representation, in terms of seeing the things that we want to see in the spaces that we are now gravitating towards or have been the last 30, 40 years, animation, cartooning, gaming, movies, film, X, Y, and Z. So I want to kind of start just with, something real basic. If each one of you guys could just, go down the list and just say, your name, obviously some of the stuff, the credits, some of the stuff you worked on, a little bit of a bio, and then we can get started that way. I guess, Carl, if you want to start, because you're to the right of me on the squares.
Sure. My name is Carl Jones. I got my start on the Boondocks, produced the first 3 seasons. From there, I went on to produce an animated series called Black Dynamite. I also did Freaknik the Musical, which was like a one-off television film. And I did some other stuff for Adult Swim, like I produced a show with Tyler, the Creator, called The Jellies. I did another show with Vince Staples and Henry Bonsu called Laser Wolf. Then I went over to Comedy Central and did a show called Legends of Chamberlain Heights. From there, I did some live action stuff. Like I did a sketch comedy show at Fox and produced a Lasso G season 3. I was a showrunner on that show. I produced a show for HBO Max called called Young Love, based on the Oscar-winning short film Hair Love by Matthew Cherry. And what else have I done? I think that's probably the most, I guess, noted stuff.
Yeah. So many things, man. So many things. We're gonna legends. Phil, jump in. Please tell us what's going on, man. Who you are, all the details.
My name is Phillip Boutte Jr., and I am a concept artist, art director, and a co-founder of 9B Collective. So my career at large, I primarily work in live action and costume, creating characters and doing, costume design for tentpole movies. So I've done Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, Inception. Drawing has just taken me so many different places. I've done 3 world tours with Madonna. There's just been a bunch of different things that my art has allowed me to do. So I've been really grateful for that. My credit list just jumps all over the map between like different tentpole projects. I also was a production designer for a long time. So I've production designed, like set design for Ariana Grande, Busta Rhymes. Like I've done a bunch of music videos as well. So I've just kind of like taken my art and kind of, expanded it along different places as I see fit. I grew up as an actor. So I was an actor from like 3 until like 17, somewhere in there, which is where I met one of my other co-founders, Aldous Hodge, who's one of our co-founders of 9B Collective. And then 9B, pretty much, we strive to diversify the artists behind the scenes. We got together and realized that there were so many artists in LA, specifically even just Black artists in LA, and we all know of each other, but we were never getting a chance to work together, or we were never in the same space. So once we got into a space where we had, resources to be able to pull everyone together, we started to see that there was an issue in the pipeline for how people hire artists of color, and then also how artists of color are created, right? Like from inception down to like when they're younger, and then the pipeline of how they get to being older and then getting hired. So we've kind of strived to do that along live action, animation, and video games. And the artists that we look for are people that are like character design, creature, prop, vehicle, all of those different things. But the main thing is just getting the studio to diversify and realize that it's not hard to do so, and getting them to actually see what that truly means. So that's kind of what we stand for.
Incredible, man. Yeah. And Chase, you're up, man.
I'm Chase Conley. I guess I've been working in LA for 12 years now, which is crazy to do that kind of math. But I started in comics, like as soon as I was able to sign a legal contract, I was already trying to work on, as an interior artist in comics. I did that for like 4 or 5 years right out of high school. Decided to kind of like transition to a bigger market, and had been friends with like LaShawn Thomas back in the day for like since he met me when I was in high school, and he just kind of gave me game about like, yo, you should get into animation, you should be a storyboard artist or a character designer. If you're a storyboard artist, you can stay on the production a lot longer than you could if you were just a designer, et cetera. I was visiting him in Seoul, and I saw that he had these Black characters on his desk that happened to be Black Dynamite. So he hooked me up with Carl. Carl gave me a shot, got me in the game. So my very first project was Black Dynamite season 1 animated series at Adult Swim, and I was a character designer for that, which was dope. It was a new experience for me. So I had jumped into the pond, like the deep end of the water, so to speak, and moved out to LA just on a whim. Was the best decision that I ever made, and I just stayed in the industry from that point. So it started off as a designer. Wanted to work in story though, and try to have that kind of like showrunner trajectory. And I felt like the best way to do that was to be a storyboard artist. So I jumped and went into that department, started working at ADHD after that, which we worked on like Major Lazer, Axe Cop. These were like early projects for me. From there, I went to a couple bigger studios and started working in, I stayed in action animation more or less. I'm a huge anime fan, and it kind of just fit with my sensibilities and the kind of cinematic staging that I wanted to do. So from there, I just stayed in action animation and kept rising up a little bit. And now I'm directing projects and such. So my credits list, I guess, going back to Black Dynamite being the first one I ever worked on, which was dope. Major Lazer, Axe Cop. I worked on 2 Spider-Man shows, like Ultimate Spider-Man season 4, Marvel Spider-Man, went over to DC. I made 4 movies with them, like Batman, Harley Quinn, Teen Titans, Judas Contract, Gotham by Gaslight, Death of Superman Part 1. Went to DreamWorks and did some more cartoony stuff, which I worked on Puss in Boots season 4. I worked on this Chinese feature that I don't know, it might not come out, so I don't want to say the name of it. Jump back to DreamWorks to work on Kipo and The Age of Wonder Beasts with Netflix. So I was directing on that, did 2 seasons of that, jumped over to Powerhouse, worked on Blood of Zeus as an in-house board artist, and then kind of got burned out and took a bit of a break. And then Aaron called me for the Boondocks reboot and asked me to come over and help Sun Kim as a designer, which was dope because that was like a change of pace for me. And, I like to keep both swords sharp. After you storyboard for years, sometimes your draftsmanship can kind of take a hit. You know what I mean? So it was cool and gave me some all new confidence and kind of rediscovering myself as well as an artist after like a 10-year period of doing the same thing. So, I jumped into that. We were doing that for about a year and ended up that got put on hold, and I jumped to Lex and Otis, and I was directing on Ark Survival Evolved, which is the video game adaptation. And in the middle of that job, Blur had called me. Jeff Fowler hit me up because he wanted me to work on Sonic 1. I was too busy. But Sonic 2 came around, and I was like, I can't miss this opportunity to get my first movie credit. So I did that, and I was able to do the main fight scenes and with Sonic versus Knuckles and Sonic 2, which was really dope. And after that, I really was burned out because I was doing 2 jobs at once, which is I don't recommend anybody do, but directing and working at Blur full time. And I took a little bit of a break after that and started teaching. So now I teach on projectcity.tv, that platform, which is really cool, which we just kind of it's a story-based platform where we kind of teach storyboarding and all the stuff that it takes to make a good story and put it together, which is more or less kind of becoming like a hub for animatics, so you can go and get a whole bunch of cool content from young creators. And after that, right when I was like, okay, I'm gonna just take a break from animation for a bit and just work on personal projects, I was at my mom's house visiting in Charlotte for the first time in like years, and then the line producer for X-Men called me and was like, yo, we're doing X-Men. We heard around the grapevine that you want to be involved in this. Do you want to come on board and direct? So I've been working on X-Men, the new X-Men reboot. Well, it's not a reboot, it's a continuation of the 90s show. So the last 2 years. So have my head down doing that and doing a bunch of personal projects as well. So just trying to expand as a creative, and a bunch of projects sprinkled in between, like tons of, like a few commercials. I directed a Westbrook, his MVP commercial. Me and Ronald Wimberly got to do that, and I've done a couple Champs things for them as well. Other ad campaign kind of stuff, and yeah, man, you know. Oh, and I worked on Cyberpunk Edge Runners, which was cool. That was my first anime credit, so I was hyped. And I heard that just won Crunchyroll Anime of the Year, so you know, I'm gonna pat myself on the back for the little bit of stuff I didn't do. You know, I did a couple things, but that was it. So yeah, that's me in a rundown. You know, just I keep my head down. I'm a creative man, and I'm always kind of shackled to my desk. You know.
But banging stuff out, man, and like, you know, you and I talk quite a bit, and there's so many projects I did not even know about that you just mentioned in that list, and all of you guys have got really amazing projects.
Kind of forget sometimes. It's like, you know, you're once you're done with it, it's like it's gone
right out. Yeah. Facts. Now, I was going to say, guys, that you know, you three are really, like, because you're pillars in your industry, you're inspiring a lot of other people to create in terms of just, you know, their comics or their animations, and really having people like you're giving people that creative spark. You're inspiring them. And what inspires the inspirer, though? I guess so. Another way to phrase this question is, what is something each one of you have been inspired by lately, whether it's creativity or family or friends or just really anything that kind of lights your fire creatively, that gets you in the creative juices to, you know, make, you know, stuff and just keep that stuff flowing.
I like research. I like research and history a lot. And I also like the core root of creativity. So like, I'm not the person that would look at the Matrix and copy the Matrix. I'd want to know what the creators of the Matrix researched, and then I would go underneath that and research from the base. Like, I very much so like, you know, the spark of imagination, where it's like you can read something and then you actually try to figure it out. But I think that your art is also, I think my art is heavily inspired by what's going on at the time too, like what's going on in the country, what I have to say about things. And then I think for me, it probably always comes down to the story and the history of the characters. So like, if I look at like a character specifically, I can't just draw the cool thing. I have to be like, what makes sense? Why do they have this on? What drives the story? Where do they end up? What's their environment? Then how can I make them stick out from the environment or blend in the environment? So I'm constantly thinking about historical context, like what people have worn, what they do, what their actions are. So I'm a people watcher. I often just sit and just watch people and how they behave. I look at what people are wearing and why, you know, that type of deal. And then I try to form some kind of opinion about that and then pepper it in with all kinds of research. And then the things that I learned. So I'm constantly taking in visual knowledge or visual kind of like, you know, bookends or, you know, bookmarks, and then pulling them back out as need be.
So
I don't know, for me, inspiration comes from everywhere, honestly. But I think the thing that drives everything that I do is probably people, you know, in a few different respects. Like, I think telling stories that resonate with people is what really drives my want to tell stories or the need to tell stories. I feel like being able to represent very specific point of views that are probably more rare is something I'm interested in doing, even though it's challenging. Because, you know, if you're telling a story from a perspective that is not a very popular perspective, right? Or it comes from people who may not necessarily be perceived as likable or, you know, universally appealing or, you know, broad enough for a global marketplace. Talking about Black people, usually that's the, you know, that's usually the thinking sometimes when you're telling stories that are very, very culturally specific. And, you know, the challenge to me is not to run away from the stories that a lot of people may even be ashamed of or may consider a stereotype. I like to find the humanity, in some of these, more popular, more unpopular perspectives or people who live in places that could be impoverished or may not necessarily, may not necessarily have the lifestyle that you think the whole world would necessarily relate to. Like those are the things that inspire me because it's a challenge, and I think especially, going through many instances in my career where I'm being told that, I'm being pushed to make characters more likable, right? Which usually means filter these characters through a white gaze, typically, right? And it should be up to the viewer to meet the characters halfway and understand who they are, right? And I do feel like a lot of the viewers are up to that. It's just that the gatekeepers and a lot of the studios are having a hard time still wrapping their head around how these stories can still be massively universal appealing, even though they're coming from a very small group of people that share a common experience. So that's something that inspires me all the time. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be Black characters per se, but I just like, I don't know, I'm always up for that challenge, to break down those walls and the status quos and create content that is even sometimes polarizing. Because I think, like, even if it sparks a conversation, then I feel like it was a success. Whether a lot of people hated it and liked it, I think it's good if it created conversation.
Incredible. Chase, you got what's inspiring you today, man?
Yeah, same. I mean, like everything inspires me. For me though, there's certain people that I'm still chasing. Like the older that I get, the stuff that I was inspired by when I first started trying to like replicate that stuff, right? I'm still inspired by that because now I have a more mature eye and I understand a bit more of what it takes to achieve certain levels of certain things, I look at this like mastery with a whole new scope, I should say, so, and also I really want to, there's certain projects and anime and things like that we got, and I feel like in the Black community but we don't get the chance to see ourselves represented in that. So I just want to try to put us in those stories, because we consume it all the time. That's what we grew up consuming. So I just want to like put us in those stories so we can kind of get, to feel that. And as well as do it on a high level. I want to try to achieve my driving force is try to achieve that level of mastery so that when I do put our faces on this kind of content, that it stands up to that, then it just becomes great content, right? Where it's just not like the character's race is that character's whole plot, you know what I mean? And also trying to learn, as well, like something that's been inspiring me recently, which I've always kind of played, it's been an interesting journey in the sense that I've always kind of approached it kind of cautiously in the sense that maybe it's just me trying to getting to know myself as well. But see, I never met my father growing up, right? But my father's Ethiopian. And so that's a whole other side of my culture that I don't know anything about. But I also didn't want that to be my identity, right? So I've always kind of had this struggle of like, how much of that do I allow to inform my work, and so on and so forth. But the way that makes me feel is what I want to capture. Like that conversation that I'm having with myself is what I want to try to capture, and just the exploration in that is enough to be something that I can make a story about or content about, and trying to be able to just focus that into something that that also makes me feel as if it's as potent as the sensation that I get when I think about that stuff. As angry as it may be, or as happy as it may make me when I find this, that, and the third out. I just want to make work that makes me feel that level of impact. And there are certain, of course, there's certain directors and designers and aesthetics that I've always been chasing as well. I've always been a big fan of Yutaka Manawa and Yoshiaki Kawajiri, and I didn't know how much of a fan I was because I had to start learning these names as I started working in animation and had to reference them more specifically. When I started working with Carl, he was really pushing like the Takeshi Koike, real push kind of dope, heavy black shadows, volumes that play with the lens and all that kind of stuff. I'm doing with my hands. They play with the lens and all that kind of stuff and manipulate forms and volumes in space. And also another thing as well, like I want to try to be, I know this is subjective, but I want to try to be the best artist, not like the best ever, but like the best artist. And for me, when I think about the greats, right, Michelangelo and all the other people that you would list, to me, today's equivalent of that would be animation artists, because of just how much understanding that you have to manipulate space, objects in a three-dimensional space. And you got timing and all this other kind of stuff. It's the same as sculpting in marble. It's just as hard. Of course, there's steps and things like that that come with that medium, right? That it's not like it's easy to pick up. But I find that level of understanding as an artist, I would feel satisfied mastering that if I'm in my pursuit of trying to be like my best self, So a lot of that stuff just feels like it's kind of up in the ether, a little bit. And I'm trying to quantify it each day. And you can ask me tomorrow, my answer might be different, but that's kind of where I'm at with it, So like some levels of self-discovery, visual aesthetic, and then also just trying to be the most potent storyteller that I can be, because those are the things that stick with you, like the ideas and the concepts and the questions that you make, with your, because I don't like to answer questions. I like to make people ask questions, or I'll ask the question and I'll just walk away. And then, that conversation is all that really matters for me after the fact, and then I feel like I've done my job as well. So.
Absolutely. I was going to say, I think, I was watching one of your influenced a while back and you were talking about X, that anime X, and how that influenced your work quite a bit. And then I was just starting to see some of the similarities, because I remember seeing that as a kid and being kind of blown away by like the larger proportions and some of the smaller bodies and just some of the lighting. And then, for me, I think about, manga, how much I love manga because I'm a comic book artist and writer creator at heart, and how much I love anime too. And obviously, anime being birthed from manga, and, thinking about animes like Berserk or The Guyver or Akira, and how influential they were for me and my storytelling. So even my Western storytelling has an Eastern flair to it. So do you guys have any other animes that, or just comics or anime that really inspired you to kind of like push you in this direction of creativity and on this trajectory that you're on now?
Oh, I can piggyback on that just real quick. So Ghost in the Shell, because I like anime that was the directors were influenced by live action cinema, and that's like a particular era to me. I'm not saying that the more contemporary ones aren't, but as anime has, there's more and more of it, it feels like certain things are regurgitations of certain things. Whereas I feel like the stuff that I was inspired by, they were more influenced by live action cinema. But I love Ghost in the Shell, Paprika, Perfect Blue, Ninja Scroll, Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust. There's a few series, Cowboy Bebop, a few series in there as well. But now I will say the more interesting thing about those are they are great for the overall aesthetic of the world, but I look at those characters as what they are because most of the characters, they are Japanese. So what I try to do is figure out what our features look like in that style, because there's no reference for that. There's no reference for our facial features as African people in those styles. So trying to figure out where that stuff fits is kind of my journey as well. So I do a lot of collecting from different places in that regard. But those are like my staples, I think. Jinro, Tokyo Godfathers, a lot of Satoshi Kon stuff. Yuasa, all his stuff as well, Mind Game, Tekken Kinkreet, all that stuff also. But those are probably like my heavy hitters. Blood the Last Vampire. And I like stuff from a particular era. I did like that 90s to 2000s era, for real, for me, it's just like that's like the pinnacle, because it was like those artists were still using cells, and it just felt like you had to be such a great draftsman to execute that stuff on the level they were executing it, given the medium that they were using. That's, like I said, it's not a slight to anybody today, but that's just kind of the stuff that's influenced me. And of course, there are tons of contemporary things that I love, but I always go back to those same ones.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna probably say some of the same same titles that Chase named. But I feel the same way, man. That time period was it was different, man. It was different. The anime was hitting different. Yeah, a huge fan of Cowboy Bebop, all the Takeshi Koike stuff. And Yaosa, like you mentioned, like with Tekken Concrete and those kind of, like I also really like Samurai Champloo, Fooly Cooly,
for sure.
Cordy Cordy. Actually, and then was that
Studio Gynex, right? Yeah.
Yeah, Gynex. I love the Gynex stuff, and like, Kill la Kill and Studio Trigger, I mean, and I also I like a lot of Miyazaki stuff too. I like a lot of the whimsical, fantastical fantasy stuff, even though I know, like, hardcore anime heads don't really see Miyazaki as as like anime, but really still very, very inspiring. And I love the Animatrix stuff, was really cool. A big fan of Dead Leaves too. Like Dead Leaves is really dope to me. And for me, what'd you say?
Amaishi.
Right.
Yeah.
I like a lot of studios and directors that are really just pushing the envelope and not just doing traditional style anime, but like Chase said, like being really, really cinematic, and but also like pushing the shapes and putting the cameras in some very, very odd places is always really exciting to me, and still being able to tell a story, and getting, because sometimes you can put a camera somewhere in the room, it could just be a scene where just two characters are having a conversation, but you can put the camera somewhere in the room that still gets a certain feeling across, or a vibe across, that you want the audience to feel as this conversation is happening. And that's always like, I love when I see directors do stuff like that, when they're really brave about, their choices and intentional, with their shots, even though it's unconventional, and Takeshi Koike, I think, really spoke to me because, like it was anime, but he pushed a lot of his designs and his shapes and really exaggerated a lot of the form. And I thought that was just really, it stood out in a crowd of other things that looked very similar, and Studio Trigger's the same way. I feel like they have like a very unique approach. And Cyberpunk was incredible. I didn't even know you worked on it, Chase. So my hats off to you, because that shit was amazing. Like, I was watching it, I got mad when I was watching it because it was that good. I was just like, how in the world is this? Like, I don't even understand it. Trigger is just insane, man. Like, really good. And I'm actually working with them, which I could talk about a little later. With this company we're forming, Super Dope. So they're actually like a part of what we're doing as well. But yeah.
I don't have anything to say. Both of them work in animation way more than I do. The only one that I would add is Akira. I loved Akira growing up as a kid. Akira, Ninja Scroll for me, Street Fighter the movie. There was a few of those in there where it's that same period of time where it just felt like, because the further back you go, there's something, especially when you're looking at the history of just entertainment things, right? Like, I'll go back and I'll look at it, because back then it was just, like you said, no slight to people now, but it feels like there was a time where if you were in something, you had to be really good at it. Like, you had to be. Like, if you were going to sing, you had to sing and dance and do all the stuff, and you had to be good at all of them. Like, you couldn't just kind of half-ass anything. Animation kind of feels the same way. There was that core group of that time period where it just felt like their shots were dope, the way that they were showing the things, the way they were elongating action in the form and, exaggerating things and all of that, and the styles they were using. So I just remember being really inspired during that time. There's something else I wanted to go back to between what Carl said, was I think that when you're looking at the inspiration of these things, one of the biggest things that I've noticed, like something that I look up to for both Carl and Chase, is that they're both actionable. which is I think when you start to get to a point in your career, you become less like the person that complains or says, we need this or we need that. And you become the person that does. And I think that that's like a shared quality where you start to become the person that actually like puts something out into the world or does something about it or has something to say. So I just wanted to kind of touch on that really quickly, because I think that it is a quality that you may not even realize you have, but it's something that you do, and it kind of separates you out just from the sense of being able to then go and actually put something out into the world that matters, right? That actually can like, you know, inspire people or do something else. So that's something I wanted to kind of call back to, just because I think it's important. And I think a lot of the animation during that specific time that Chase is talking about they all had something to say, but they did it in like a really prolific, like different way, and like at the top level. And then when you thinking about like Black characters, one of the things that when I talk about being actionable, I feel a charge, at least in terms of what we're doing right now in the space and animation specifically, is being able to speak up, right? So it's like, if we don't speak up when we're in the room, nobody else will, right? So it's like, I have to be the person that asks the questions. Like, when you say you want that character to be more cute, what does that mean? What does that mean to you? Are you saying you want me to erase their Black features to make them look like more generic? You know, are you saying that you want their skin tone to be lighter because then to you that means they're more cute? Like, I really have to ask those questions and kind of push it back and forth, and not in a bad way, just to say like, what is it that you're actually saying? And then where are we moving to? So are we moving to a place to where, like, you know, if I've got a little Black girl and she's got a big forehead, you don't say, let's shrink it. It's like, no, she's got a 5 head. They have those. Like, I want to see that, right? Like, I want to see that actually on screen, because we've seen it done so many different ways. Or I don't want them to be to where if you just switch out their skin tone, it doesn't matter. Like, it should matter. Their features should be pushed enough to where you can tell what they are. And I think that that's the last frontier in terms of like where we are, at least in diversifying these projects, is being able for people, however specialized it is, for them to see a little bit of themselves and to know that someone got it right. So if you're doing an animation, I say this one often, if 2 Black characters are walking past each other and they don't know each other, what do they do? And so many people like, they wave. And I'm like, they don't wave, they nod. Like, you should know this. Like, it's a small little thing that if you put it on screen, it doesn't require any concept. It doesn't require any thought. It's just that I feel seen immediately. And I think that there's something like that in every single culture. So you guys have been touching on it. I just wanted to bring it up in terms of like where we have to be. But I think that when we're in these spaces, one of the biggest charges I feel is to actually speak up or to ask questions that makes people like to like kind of challenge that status quo a little bit, and then make people really think about what they're saying or like what that means. Because visuals are inherently linear. So as the further back you go, the less you include other people, right? That's just the way that it goes. And so at a certain point, I'm like, no, I don't want to reference Citizen Kane anymore. I want to reference something to where I can actually see myself in it. And I want to challenge people to do the same. So that's my rant for that. But it was like kind of my thought process of listening to both of you talk, kind of like just thinking about how that ties together.
I want to quickly add too, just for everybody who's watching, in terms of what we're talking about, like, timeline wise, most animation, from historically speaking, was drawn by hand by a team of people on cells, one piece of paper on top of the other, eventually animated through a camera. When it was reaching its pinnacle in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s, we're talking about, you know, whole entire animation teams of artisans that were absolutely the best at what they did, whether they're drawing vehicles or expressions or hair or wind or organics, you know, shrubbery, you know, forests, like all of these things. And now we're kind of in a space where animation is being spliced with 3D. So a lot of these backgrounds are being built in a program. And even a lot of times the characters are being built, their objects, their suits, all these things are being built with 3D and being animated there. So if you, for example, you may watch the original Berserk, you know, OVA series, 26 episodes. OVA means original video anime. A lot of times goes straight to TV in Japan or wherever it premieres. And then the newer one is all completely 3D. And there's such a big uproar about how it looks because it changed the essence of what it looks like. So super important thing. And I'll quickly jump back to you, Phil. I, was reading the story. I know you touched on it earlier when we were giving your bio, how you were an actor from age 3 to 17, and your father would be in the trailer with you and say, "Hey, look at these comic books. I want you to draw. I want you to stay grounded. Like, get into this world." What were some of the comic books that you were reading and you're really inspired by, in your trailer while you were jumping between acting roles and commercials and all that other stuff?
It was important for my parents to, because I was growing up in an environment around adults all the time, they wanted to make sure that I kind of maintained being a kid. So I was kind of like isolated. They didn't want me to be like one of those crazy Hollywood kids that's like hanging out with adults till like 2 a.m. and being like, "What's up with your life?" type deal. So I'm very thankful for that, because I did see friends kind of go down a path where it was just like, "Whoa, what's going on?" I would sit in my trailer, besides doing, my set homework and stuff like that, because I was in and out of school. And my dad worked at the old Unical building, which is now, I think, it's a studio. It's in downtown LA. You can see it off the freeway. It's like a film studio now, but it used to be the Unical building. And there's these old printers. I'm gonna date myself how old I am, but there was these printers that had these little rings, like the little circles down the side, and it would feed in, and then the printer would spool the paper up. So I had big boxes of that, and I just sit and draw. And the comics that I know that I related to the most would probably X-Men and Spider-Man. Like, I was like, those are the two that I like really read religiously. And I remember at a certain point, which I was actually excited about now, I just got Dennis and Reggie to sign my old Milestone comics, because I still have them, like the original ones when they first came out. So then it would turn into Static and Icon and Rocket and all those different ones. But I remember, it's like when you're younger, you don't make a relationship to those things in terms of like, or at least I didn't notice why I was drawn to those things. I just knew that I was drawn to them and that they felt different. So it's like Static and Icon and Rocket, I was just like, this feels cool. But I didn't realize it's like, oh, because they're Black. Like, I just didn't make that connection at the time. And so my dad, and especially my mom just at one point sat me down when I was really young, and she'd be like, "How come you don't draw Black characters?" And I didn't understand what she meant. And I looked back on it and I was like, oh, I'm literally just drawing what I see. I'm drawing the things, like, so I'm looking at Willow and Neverending Story and all these different movies, and I'm just drawing based off of that. That kind of shifted me to drawing things more in a more way, like where I can relate to them a little bit better. And I think X-Men I related to just because it already inherently has those undertones, right? It has struggle, it has different characters, it has the undertone of like the struggle of like racism and systemic racism. It has all that stuff in there kind of built in. So I feel like I inherently kind of related to that. So that's kind of what I would do in my off time, was just draw. And when I decided I didn't want to act when I was about like 16 or 17, that's the thing that I felt like I wanted to go into, was drawing. But that was kind of how I related to the world. And then eventually in my career, I just got to the point where if there was a character, if I'm reading and I'm starting a movie and there's a character that's nondescript, where they don't have anything, they're just like, you walk into a bar, a Japanese sushi bar, and the hostess greets the person, I might draw the hostess as a Black woman in a kimono, just because I know that they're not thinking that. And then that might inspire them to actually think about that role a little bit differently. And I'm constantly trying to push that envelope or do that. But that comes from like how I was drawing as a kid. I was just starting to draw different stuff and figuring stuff out. And then I got really inspired by people and the different places I was traveling. Traveling is a big one too. When you think about inspiration, just traveling and meeting other people outside of yourself. So I think that that's kind of where that started for me. That was that initial spark. And then, of course, being an actor, you're playing so many different characters. It's like 1 week I'm learning to ride a horse, and the next week I'm fencing, and then I'm like playing basketball. Like, it was all these different things. So it really inspired me to like do, like, it's just like, it's weird to talk about because it's like a hard thing to quantify. It's like you're constantly doing something in entertainment. You're either dancing or singing or moving around or talking to people or like, playing stuff outside of yourself. Right. So that was another one, is I'm pretty much, my parents were upper middle class, both graduated from UCLA. So like I got teased a lot as a kid as being like the Cosby kid, right? Because everyone's like, you've got both of your parents. And I'm like, why is that a bad thing? Like, I don't understand. I didn't understand. I was like, what is that? Like, why is that weird? Like, and then I understood it later, but I was like, I don't understand why that's weird. But it was always getting teased for being the square, or being the thing that like, you have all the stuff. And I was like, I don't understand it. But then as I became a teenager, I got frustrated because then all of the roles I was being offered were all like what I would consider negative or like stereotypes. It would be like, okay, now you're a gang member. And I'm like, again? And they're like, now you're a drug dealer. Now you're a drug dealer and a gang member. And I'm like, dang, like, are there any like are there any roles for people like I was like, can I just be like normal and be successful? And they're just like, oh, we have the Cosby Show. And I'm like, okay, well, can there be another show like that, or can we have other things? So that's pretty much that was a big caveat for me stopping doing that and then wanting to go back in and then like diving more into comics and animation and stuff and being like, maybe I can create something where I can see more of us, like where it peppers it out more to where, because I was like, that wasn't my experience too. A lot of my friends were exactly the same way. And I realized there wasn't entertainment being made for us, where it was just like, why are we only seen this way? And they'd be like, and I can never, it would almost get to the point where someone would almost have it and they'd mess it up. They'd be like, we got this thing, Phil, it's going to be awesome. It's this little black kid that goes on an adventure. And I'm like, great. And then they'd be like, but first he's a drug dealer. And I'm like, no. And like, it'd be like, why does he have to start there? Why isn't our base just like he's just at home and then he reads some magic book and now he's on an adventure? Why does it have to be like his mom is strung out on crack? You're like, what is happening? Like, I remember it always being super frustrating. So that's why I got into it, to change it. Basically, I wanted to really get into it. And I figured animation, video games, all of those things were they felt like a good catalyst for doing that, because they're also things people spend time with, right? Animation, people will watch over and over again. Video games, you have to play for hours. So that really can get you to emote with people that don't look like yourself. So that's kind of where I kind of spawned into, the career path.
Absolutely. And there's so much more I want to ask you about that and some of the other stuff you have going on, but I want to quickly jump to Carl just to piggyback off of your experience working in the animation industry. I mean, like anybody who's watching this and wants to get into animation, Carl's basically worked for every studio, whether it's Titmouse or Cartoon Network or Bento Box, Sony Pictures Animation, and now he's starting his own company, Martian Blueberry. Obviously, Super Dope is happening too. So he's been around the block. He's seen everything. Carl, can you just tell people just a little bit about the changes you've seen within the time period you've been in animation in LA, just like some of the wants, the needs, just how everything's kind of ebbed and flowed over time?
I don't think I've seen enough change happen. I think that's probably my biggest issue, and what I mean by that is, yeah, there's more stories being told from my perspective. And a lot of that happened in light of the George Floyd incident. For some, like right after that happened, it was kind of like this black reparations that took place in Hollywood. And they all of a sudden said, oh, these people have stories that need to be told. Well, you did that because you were afraid of getting canceled and your store getting ransacked, right? But in terms of like real change, like a real, sincere interest in giving us opportunity to tell our stories, I don't think it shifted a whole lot. And I think that it's funny because like during that time, or during the pandemic and right after the George Floyd incident, my phone was ringing off the hook, like everybody wanted me to work on a black project, right? And it was kind of funny, but it was also kind of sad, because I was getting these jobs by default. It wasn't just that, I was that good. It was just that there's not a whole lot of black showrunners, especially in animation. And so my whole, ever since I got in this industry, the way I've been thinking is, how can I pull off some Harriet Tubman type shit? Like, how can I really like open the door, to the Underground Railroad and let other people in who don't typically have an opportunity, like myself, I came from a place where nobody around me was doing what I do now. I've never seen it was like almost unheard of. And, me and Chase, we both from North Carolina. And, and when I saw his work, and I know at the time, he hadn't done any real work in animation, but I knew if he was given the opportunity, he would change this whole fucking town probably, And it was a little bit of a fight. I don't even know if I ever told him that, but it was a little bit of a fight at first because, a lot of these animation studios, they got their go-to artists and they don't always understand how important it is to get people that understand the culture. You know what I mean? And I saw that not only was he a really dope artist, but we spoke the same language in terms of culture, and he understood those nuances that I knew. We're never gonna. No one at that studio had the understanding to deliver what we needed for that show. And so he came in and he really not to make this all about Chase, but he did really elevate the whole entire show to a different level. And so that's something that I take pride in, and I try to look for many opportunities to do that any chance I get. Even with Shauna Mills, it was the same thing. Like when I saw Shauna, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Shauna Mills, but she's an amazing artist, amazing animator, storyboard artist, director, animator. Like she's insane, right? But at the time when I met her, you know, she hadn't done a whole lot either. But I told her, I was like, yo, if you come out to LA, I guarantee you it's going to be a game changer for you. And I think that I don't know. I just always feel like it's not even a matter of talent. It's just opportunities that we need. You know, there's tons of talented Black artists and creatives out there and storytellers. You know, it's just not enough people, I think, opening the door for more to come through. So for me, over the course of my career, that's all I've been focused on doing. And with Martian Blueberry, this animation studio that we launched, the primary goal of that studio was to be able to satisfy that need, because two needs. One is capturing those cultural nuances and understanding the language and the visual language, and also the actual narrative and the culture of you know, when you're doing a show and you want it to be authentic to the voice of the creative, and the creative happens to be Black, you need people that are thinking about that, not just drawing nice pictures. Because a lot of times these studios, if they have a really dope artist, you know, they'll just put him on a show because visually he can produce something that looks good, but he's still missing the entire point of the scene, the entire vibe, everything is not, you know what I mean? So it's not going to hit on all cylinders like you had with the Boondocks and Black Dynamite. So the studio that we formed that was our intention. Our intention was to hire, you know, more Black people from all over the diaspora, you know. So we got artists in Brazil, we got artists in Ghana, in Kenya, Nigeria. Like we're working with artists from all over, so that we can become that go-to place, you know, to tell our stories in an authentic way. The other thing I'll add is when I was on the Boondocks, there was first of all, there wasn't any we didn't have a lot of artists that, like, the artists, there was no domestic artists that we had that understood anime the way that a lot of the Korean studios did. And we work with studios in Japan and Korea, but then obviously there's a language barrier and there's a cultural barrier. So I ended up having to act out entire episodes on camera, and then we would send it overseas in order for them to truly understand, you know what I'm saying, like those nuances and stuff, right? And then when I looked at all the other shows that I produced from the Boondocks to this day, and these are really dope studios like 6 Point Harness and Bento Box and Titmouse, really great studios, but they do have a lack of diversity. So and most of these guys are coming out of Cal Arts, and you don't really see a whole lot of Black artists coming out of Cal Arts, and they're not going to the HBCUs. You know what I'm saying? So it's just a lack of it. So that was the primary goal, is to hire, you know, more of us so that we can tell our stories in an authentic way. And that's, I mean, and to your point, Phil, that's how I look at things. Like, I'm gonna be the change that I want to see, you know, versus just say Hollywood won't open the door and let us in. Well, fuck Hollywood. Like, do your own thing, make it possible. Yeah. You know,
you got to do it yourself. And I think ultimately, I will encourage the audience too. If you haven't seen any of the behind the scenes featurettes of Boondocks and stuff where they are acting out the stuff, you should watch them because they're hilarious. Like teaching animators how to like ghost ride the whip is hilarious. Just like showing them a video of someone doing, they're like, what are they saying? What's going on? And watching them actually have to learn it, I think is just funny. Because I think that there is that cultural barrier. So props to you guys for doing that, because that also is a huge thing, just to get it right and get the authenticity right, is a big thing. But what Carl said is true, which is like, you have to kind of be the change. Chase is really humble, and he'll sit there and act like stuff just comes out of nowhere, but he works really hard. Like, his drawings are insane. He did a drawing, I think I always tease him about, of Storm And it's like, Storm looks great, but the tornado behind her, I was like, who draws tornadoes like this? Like, just insane, right? Just the level of detail. So I can see him coming onto a project with Carl and elevating it completely, and then being completely humble about it, because ultimately his goal is just to be a great draftsman, right? And I think that the goal for us now as creators is to create stories where our people are seen and heard, and then also reaching out, reaching out to different artists all over the world and trying to see if you can kind of get people to not only pay attention to them and pay attention to their stories. We always talk about it being equity, which is giving them equity in the story to where they actually have a voice. So it's not just enough to hire, I guess, diversely and to make sure that people are in the room. It's that they actually have a voice, because that's another thing. It's like, right, you can hire someone and they could be from Nigeria and it could be a Nigerian project. But then if the Nigerian people don't have a say, then they're just kind of there by default, just drawing, right? So it's like giving them a voice to actually tell their story. So I think that that's also important. And I think that that's the way that you kind of do that, is like, you have to start opening the door for other people. We constantly partner with other companies, and we also try to make sure that we're the ones that are doing the work to support like Black-owned businesses as well. So we try to make sure that we reach out and try to see what's going on. Or we've reached out to some people where we're like, hey, do you want to work with us? They're like, I have my own company. And then we immediately switch into, okay, well, how can we amplify your signal? And people are like, what do you mean? It's like, I'll just do support, just blanketed just for whatever, right? Like, I follow Carl for forever. Whenever Carl posts something, I send it over to our 9B people and say, post this, like, support this, like, and just blanket. That's just, I think it's the missing piece sometimes. I think especially in Black culture, it's like when people are doing stuff, it's like, okay, great, I will support this just because I know what this is and I know where that needs to go. And so we've also tried to make sure that we're doing our due diligence in that way too, which is just showing support regardless of how it goes, because I think if we can kind of band together in those ways, it just makes us more powerful, and it makes it to where we can get our stories out, because there's more people kind of collectively doing it as opposed to us all trying to like splinter off and do it separately. So
amen to that. And thanks for sharing that, Carl and Phil. And Chase, I want to quickly jump over, since we're talking about you, man. You know, some of the work that I initially came across of Chase's work was with Run DMC and Ron Wimberly, and two, you know, incredible creators in their own right. I love Ron's work. You know, for years he's been just a GOAT in my opinion. And you know, obviously, I think DMC tapped you to work on his book when it was first coming out, and he actually, you know, worked with a lot of other great, amazing Black artists. So, Chase, tell us a little bit about really just currently, you know, the directing part versus like, okay, being a storyboard artist, you know, drawing animatics. I remember you sharing some of your very, you know, rough animatics and how that broke down, because, you know, doing storyboards in the traditional sense versus animatics are very, very different. And the industry is changing in a direction where animatics are even more celebrated, more wanted, more than just regular storyboards. But obviously the directing part, that's a whole nother arm. And we were trying to get Shauna to be on this panel as well, so she could talk about it, because she's also directing the show. But Chase, please jump in. Tell us a little bit about the directorial part versus doing storyboards, and just the shift between those two different, you know, two different roles within the industry.
Yeah, I mean, you're still using the same muscle, I believe. You're still solving things. It's just you have to delegate tasks. And you know, as far as animation now, I mean, animatics, I mean, storyboards are pretty much just animatics, because we pose so much stuff out. I think that's just kind of like a result of what our pipeline has been over the last 20, 30 years. Like, we ship everything overseas, and then we want animation to come back in a particular way, especially with shows that have very specific kind of style. You see that a lot with action shows, because we want it to look like the model sheets that we ship is along with the storyboards, right, with the animatics. And that's mainly because we do pre-production here, we do design here. Whereas
you say pose something out, can you clarify that for everybody? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but pose something out.
No, that's cool. That's totally fine. Like, so pre-production, we basically, so we do pre-production here, and they do, and then main production where they ship it. So we design the backgrounds, the characters, the script is written, etc. We don't paint every single background of every shot, but we do paint the key backgrounds that show, like, this is the master shot that shows all the angles, so that if the part of the vendor's deal would be like, okay, we're going to animate it and we'll do like a half of the background paintings or 3/4 of the background paintings, so that the ones we provide them with have enough information for them to go off of and then fill in the rest of the ones in the animatic, right? The rest of the shots. The interesting thing about that though is like, since we do so much pre-production here and it's kind of just disconnected in that way, because it's like they're all the way over there. There's a time difference, there's a language barrier, there's a cultural difference as well. When you see anime and stuff, like when you look at Japanese storyboards, they can be super rough because they're in the studio, right? So if it's like you need to explain what a shot is supposed to be, or how this character is supposed to be moving, or what this timing's like, etc., you can walk over to the animator's desk and tell them that, you know, or you could call them on the phone, or you can get on. It's much easier for you to communicate that stuff, where it's not so much for us, you know. And also, most often than not, especially on this old school, like I don't want to call it old schools, it really ain't old school, but from the anime from the period, and even now, the animation director, a lot of times, the person that's in control of supervising all of the animation department is normally the character designer as well. Because it's like, if I'm going to be responsible for the way it moves and the quality of the motion, I need to be responsible for what is being tracked, the amount of detail that's being tracked in each one of the character designs, right? We were talking about Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk was designed and animation directed by Yo-Yo Shinori, right? You know, and that, so since he was in control of all of that, he also was in control of the designs. I think because he's such a legend also, that he got them to track crazy detail in those designs that a lot of people would not be able to necessarily do. But that just comes with being a legend, right? So we put a lot of, basically, I say all that to say, we put a lot of information in our animatics, you know, so that we can at least try to, on our end, make sure that we're giving them everything that we can, so that they can't come back and be like, well, you didn't provide us with that, right? You know, so that means like getting the volumes right, getting the character scale right, you know, all that stuff that you feel like, oh, they'll fix it. Most likely they won't, especially in a TV schedule. You know, it's different when you're working in feature. But in TV, you have to make sure that it's like, we're trying to hit deadlines, and, you know, their layout departments might not be as strong over there. Layout being like the character layout, where they take our storyboards then and blow them up for the first main key drawings. It's not like the main key frames, but the main keys before it goes to a keyframe artist, right? They might not be the best draftsmen, right? And then we don't necessarily have time to ship them all the layouts in the world. And even if we have layout approval, we might not have time to draw over every one of those layouts and send it back to them, right? To keep the ball moving, because then it would bottleneck. So we provide them with as much information as we can in the front, and, you know, and then just kind of hope for the best. But a lot of times, you know, we also, you don't have a lot of retake budget. You know, we have a retake budget most of the time, but you can't, you know, when you get take ones, you got to start tiering out immediately. Okay, which ones can we live with? Which ones can we not show? Which ones do we have to absolutely fix, you know, for this to work, you know? So it's thinking about that too. And it's really just thinking about the macro, like the whole of it, as opposed to the micro. I think as a storyboard artist or an animator, you could be focused on just your scene, right? But as a director, so like a storyboard artist, I'll give them a typical full page handout is 8 to 10 pages, you know, about that, you know, anywhere from that. A normal script for a half-hour show, which could be sub 26 or sub 22, could be, you know, 24 to 30 pages, right? So they're getting about, you know, anywhere from 7 to 10 pages to script. Each script page is supposed to be equal to a minute. You know, all script pages aren't built equal, but that's another conversation. A lot of board artists take that little act that they have, or that, especially if it's not broken into acts. Let's say it's broken into scenes where it's like, okay, you get this sequence and then somebody else gets the next 4 sequences, and then you get this sequence after that, and then this sequence after that. They're trying to do their storytelling in like almost like a 3-act structure in that little scene, because they're just thinking about how the storytelling of this one particular scene. There's only 2 pages of script. And so like, let's say they want to do action and there's an action beat there. They may board the craziest action sequence, but you have to look at what the significance of that action is in the script, in the scheme of all of it. So it's like, you don't want a storyboard artist to overboard and then, you know, draw 300-400 panels of storyboards that's going to get thrown out, because it's only a 26 or 22-minute show, right? And so we got the big fight scene at the end. That's the one that has all the significance. So, and so it's really about that. And then also tracking subtext. You know, you got to understand the theme of the episode. Like finding the subtext of a scene is much easier, but tracking that subtext as it pertains to theme, tying that together throughout is what you really have to think about as a director as well. And you know, sitting in edit bay, like learning how to self-edit, like that was the best part about directing. The best influence I had on my work was being able to edit while I'm working. So I'm just not drawing a bunch of stuff aimlessly. I'm actually thinking about, okay, do I need this scene? Do I need this scene? And reading the whole script. You know what I mean? Because when you're in the trenches as a board artist, a lot of times you really, you know, it's a hard job. I personally think it's the hardest department in animation. Like I do, because there's the cerebral component, at least stateside, because there's the cerebral component. There's the overall just volume of drawings that you got to do because of the nature of how our animatics look now. I mean, my stuff looks keyed out sometimes, but that's because I want it to move a certain way, or I want certain drawings to be strong, and I'm giving them the best blueprint, you know, to work from. So yeah, I mean, you know, that in a nutshell is the main thing. Is really thinking about like the overall, and that's the difference. And then also when you do board, you have to do things in a fraction of the time. Like let's say, for instance, you know, you're on a 6-week or 8-week schedule as a board artist, right? You get a week for clean. A lot of times it's like I do like a week for thumbs, really rough thumbs. You give me your concepts about how you think you want to shoot this. Then you get 2 to 3 weeks after that to do roughs. We give you more notes in more detail and get very specific. And then you address all those notes and you bring it back in 2 or 3 more weeks as cleans. After that, I have like a week or and maybe 2 weeks to build animatic V1, right? That's when we put it in edit and they get sound design and all that. Once we get notes on that, there's like a 2-week turnaround. Sometimes that's a whole reboard of a sequence that somebody got 6-7 weeks to do. And I got to do that in 2 weeks. You know what I mean? And that's the 2 weeks that is also including the edit time that it has to be recut into the animatic. So it's really like a week. You know what I mean? So it's really about just making sure, like learning how to make decisions quickly and knowing what works and what doesn't, and understanding that clarity is key. But yeah, you know, I think it's really just thinking about like the whole of it. That's the main difference. And you know, really focusing on just thematically, you know, I think that's where you're going to get much stronger. You know what I mean? And I always tell people to really just think about subtext. So you're really concentrating on that as a director. You know what I mean?
Straight up. And guys, anybody has any questions? I mean, people who are watching this that have questions about some of the terms that Chase is using, again, this is exactly the reason why you need to be taking his class, because he goes through all of these types of things, breaks it down categorically so you can understand the bits and pieces and nuts and bolts of animation and how it all works, because there's a lot to it, clearly. And, you know, but it's a skill like any other. So you guys definitely have the opportunity to, you know, check his page out and check that class out as well. I know there's a lot of other great creators on there. What is it called? I wanted to quickly jump to, since we're talking about character design, I really want to jump to Phil and just, well, first of all, I want to just do a temperature check. It's about 9 o'clock. Can I keep you guys for about 29 more minutes to round it out to about 9:30 our time? Perfect. Yeah. Thank you so much. All right. So, yeah, Phil, I want to jump in. Tell us a little bit about how you go through the process of creating a lot of these costume designs, you know, in terms of just how characters are looking, keeping certain things authentic, the research, all these components to create. Because some of the character designs, you've done character designs for tons of things, tons of great shows, movies, music videos. You've done pretty much everything. I love for people just to hear about your process of creating those costume designs and production design and all that stuff. And then I have one other question about Mosaic in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So don't forget that. Go right ahead.
Okay, so character, especially in live action, specifically for the career that I've had, it's different than animation, at least in terms of like you're working with a costume designer. And so I've worked with like some of the best costume designers in the world. And that's been like a joy, just because I get to learn all of these different things, right? And I get to like pull in, for me, that's why I think I'm such a fan of like historical research and reference and like art history and things like that, because you have to be able to know how to conceptually take those themes and then put them into a character and then flesh out the costume, right? So the key thing for me, at least process wise, is I'm a thinker. Like I like to think about who the character is and then the why. Like I keep asking myself questions. So it's almost like if I could think about character design as a process in live action, it's almost like building a puzzle for yourself and then trying to put it together. So it's like you have to pull out all this different stuff and you're pulling in all these pieces and then you're like, oh, this fits here and this doesn't fit, this doesn't work, throw it out, right? So I think the key thing is when you start on a project with the designer, they're going to have a specific kind of thing in mind, right? So this character is evil and jealous, and so I want to dress her in all green power suits or something like that. It'll be something like that, right? But then it depends on the time period and everything else. And so you start to develop all this research based on where you are and the time period and the type of person that the person is. And then you get into all the little details. It's like, well, there's different types of pantsuits and what are they made out of and what are the shapes? And you start getting into fashion, right? So you start looking at like Balenciaga and Rick Owens and, you know, Alexander McQueen. You start looking at all these different people. And you start pulling in all these references and creating mood boards, which is basically like all your references together. So you can get a feel for what this is. And then you start to draw. So then you start to conceptually draw. I'll tell a story about how I still think about concept today based on something I learned from an earlier project. So at the end of my very first year doing costume and character, I worked with costume designer Michael Kaplan. And Michael Kaplan's a legend, right? He's done all these things. He did Blade Runner, right? So it's like he's been around for forever. So I was like super excited to do that and work with him. And at some point, so we're working on the first J.J. Abrams reboot of Star Trek. And we had a character, Winona Ryder's was playing Spock's mom. Right. So Vulcan woman, you know, the pointy ears and the haircut and the whole deal. And we're trying to figure out how Vulcan women dress. Right. So at some point, Michael was telling me that he wanted this shelf-like structure underneath the clothing to kind of flatten them out and make them, you know, just like some kind of shelf. And he was trying to explain it to everyone. We didn't understand what he meant. It just didn't make sense conceptually. Like we didn't understand what he was trying to do. But he wanted some kind of undergarment that created a little like flat shelf up here and then was like kind of flat down. And so one day I just sat down with him and said, Michael, can you explain this to me? What are you trying to do? So this is when he gave me some knowledge that I've kept this entire time, which is he said, okay, so if we look at women's dress or the history of the way that they dress, the way that their clothing is structured is usually for the male gaze, right? So what men find attractive, right? So it's like bigger boobs, big butt, big hips, whatever it is. Like it's always like a corset or something that, you know, it elongates their legs or does something to their body, the shape. So he said what he was trying to do was trying to figure out what Vulcan men find attractive. And Vulcan men find the brain attractive. So he wanted to flatten out their features to make them more androgynous. He wanted to elongate their neck. And he wanted to frame their head because that's what they find the most attractive. And I was like, what? Like, I literally, like, that was a big part of just knowledge of knowing how you conceptually break something down and how you could take true historical reference and then make it conceptual and then elevate it to somewhere else. So I think that when I approach characters now, I'm constantly trying to find that why, and I'm looking at things that I can relate things to. And then I'm drawing in references and then I'm saying, okay, this makes sense because this character is this way, or this character is strong, or they're brash. So I'm going to give them this hairstyle because that represents this in this culture. You know, it's that type of deal. So I really do a lot of research before I even start drawing. And with the costume designer, or even now on a big projects, we have researchers, right? So we have like our cultural experts or whatever. There's a lot of resources that you can use to design a character, but I try very much so to get into that pocket so that I'm not just drawing things for drawing's sake. To a degree, there are points where you just have to just come up with something cool, right? Or for me, doing comic book stuff, it's very important that I honor source material. So I'm not the person that will be like, Captain America's always been red, white, and blue, but I'm gonna make him purple. You know, like I try to make sure that it's going in that direction or in the right direction. So I look at the comic and try to elevate it out, but I also do things that make sense. So that's kind of been like the key caveat to it for me is I build these little pieces. I start finding little visual references for things. or you start finding scientific things. Like for Wakanda Forever, one of the first concepts I had for the Talokan was I knew that they were going to be Mayan, and I was looking for ways for their weaponry, right? So I was trying to design a weapon system. Now, granted, my weapon system would have been way too expensive, which is why ultimately they ended up just having spears. But I was trying to give them like some kind of armor that floated water around and they could manipulate it and use it. And so I found this element called bismuth, which is like raw bismuth. When you cut it in half, it literally looks like Mayan.
I remember this
crazy.
post.
So I was like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So then you start finding that, and that was like a big spark where I was like, oh, and then I started to draw after that. So it's like trying to find something that made sense. I also found out that bismuth actually has a magnetic quality, so it repels water. So my concept was putting the bismuth in little discs, and they spin around and they draw the water up and they can breathe and all that. So it would have been fun to do that, but that's how you start. It's always from some little conceptual thing. And it's fun because when you find it, that's when you're like, oh yeah, and then you get excited about it, right? So it's like, I find I can't get excited about something until I find that one little thing that kind of makes sense. Otherwise, I feel like I'm just phoning it in.
That's incredible, and such a really interesting and insightful piece of information. I mean, just the research component really informs that. Just like that, again, blew my mind listening to that. It's really, really cool. Carl, I want to jump back to you, man, because when I think about character design, and I think about characters, and some of the most memorable in animation is really the Boondocks. I mean, even Black Dynamite's got very similar vibe. But for me, because I remember reading the strip as like a young college kid, and then seeing the animated, cartoon on Cartoon Network, and being fiending for when season 2 coming out, and some of the very interesting characters like a pimp named Slipback, and I don't remember them being in the strip. You know what I'm saying? So like, how many characters did you kind of like add in, or did you have stuff that was not in the strip that eventually came into the animation? And I'm just curious, like characters, like, because there's some of the most unique, and I'd love to hear how you think and how you conceptualize a lot of these unique characters.
No, thank you. I'm laughing because I was just thinking, if a pimp named Slickback was in the newspapers, we would have got kicked out of every single newspaper. No, but I feel you. And I actually started out working with Aaron on the comic strip before I started working on the show, and it was interesting because when we were making this transition from the strip to the show, there was, I think, well, for one, I think Aaron Magruder always envisioned the show as being like a real anime, right? And the comic strip was it was his best attempt to make it. I mean, it was never a secret that like he never felt like the strip was drawn strong enough, and I wasn't even doing a great job at drawing the strip, honestly. But given the opportunity to make a show, he would make it look like all the anime that he truly loved. So we were able to really give it an upgrade completely. You know what I mean? And each season, I think it got continuously better. You know what I'm saying? As we worked through the kinks and the problems and started to really like hone in on exactly what the show should look like. But character-wise, there was, Uncle Ruckus was actually introduced in the comic strip first, right? And then I think we lost like 40 or 50 newspapers or something like that. Like the first week that Uncle Ruckus appeared in the comic strip, like people just started like, newspapers were just like, cutting the strip. So and it was kind of a test run, right? We were, kind of, it was probably the wrong place to test the waters, but that's what it was. It was like introducing it into the strip first and seeing how people respond to it, and then maybe it'll make its way in the show. But we had to remove him from the comic strip and only have him in the show because that's the only place that somebody like Uncle Ruckus could really live. But there was also Caesar was another character that was in the comic strip that didn't make it into the show. And there was an effort to try to figure out where he fit in the show, but we really couldn't find a reason for him, to be honest, because Caesar was kind of somewhere between, in terms of who they were as characters, Caesar, or their function in the comic strip in the show, Caesar was kind of right between Huey and Riley, right? He was kind of a mash up of the two in a way, you know what I'm saying? But the type of hip hop he was into was definitely very different from Riley. But in terms of the purpose that he served in the strip, there just wasn't really a need for him in the show. You know what I'm saying? Because he was really more like a sounding board to Huey, right? And I don't know. We tried. I remember there was a few times we tried to fit him in, and it just felt forced. It just felt like we were just trying to put him in there for the sake of putting him in there. But I don't know, man. I think the show. I always tell people like we were making 22-minute movies, and I know Chase got a chance to experience that too. You know, it was literally like the scale of those episodes was really epic. You know what I mean? In terms of the amount of scenes, the amount of characters and crowd shots, and you know what I'm saying, and the level of quality itself was damn near like feature anime level quality that we were trying to do. So with that being said, you know, I think we introduced a lot of new characters into the world of the Boondocks that you typically don't see. Well, you typically don't see that happening in most sitcoms. Most sitcoms, they have the usual suspects that you see day in, you know what I mean, week after week. And, you know, there's usually like a handful of environments that they usually frequent. You know, like if it's Family Guy, there's a bar, you know, they're usually at home. There's, you know what I mean? It's a pretty contained, you know, show. But the Boondocks rarely just sets place in the Boondocks. we go to so many other places, and we're always introducing new characters into the world. And I think because a lot of those stories were like genre driven, you know, so we might do like a horror, you know, parody, or, you know, like with Halloween, or, you know, we'll do a Scarface parody, or, you know, like that was just the show, you know, it was, and so I think because that was the kind of stories we were telling, and those were the kind of worlds we were building. It was literally like building a brand new world each episode, you know. So it was a brand new host of characters, you know, and again, that's not typically what you see with even, you know, with most adult comedies. But I think that is also the thing that made the show unique, you know. So Sony hated it, and they complained the whole time, and it was a lot of work, and we went over budget and we went over schedule every single season. But I think just looking back, though, I feel like if we would have did a contained version of the show, because the show originally was taken to Fox, and Fox turned it down. So if we would have did like a contained sitcom version of the Boondocks on Fox, it probably never would have resonated the way it did today, you know?
Facts, man. And I would say, yeah, like I said, so many of the different character types really just made the show very, very exciting. I mean, shoot, one of my favorite episodes is the Luther, the restaurant that Gramps, you know what I'm saying, like creates, and then, you know, goes into business with you know, with the fat bald white dude. He's like, they got a whole system of gentrification that's built into it. Just even those themes, like, even as a young college kid, I could relate to it. I could see it. I could feel it. Like, this is normal. This is what we see all the time when we look out our window. And just quickly, Phil, because I've got some questions for Chase. I want to jump to him. But before I do that, Phil, talk about your work with Mosaic in Grand Rapids, Michigan. That's my hometown. I didn't know you flew there every single year. This is big business. This is my selfish question for the entire panel. I want to know. Tell me some details, man.
I did a thing with the MPAA years ago, where they were trying to bring film back to LA, right? Because a lot of film was going out of the state at that time with initiatives, and so they were doing a whole push for Washington. So it was a thing, like a little featurette called I Make Movies. It was around the time maybe about Black Panther. And it was like they followed me around and just showed what my job was and kind of had me talking about what my job was. And then what those featurettes would do is that if you got, you know, when you get to the theater early, if you get to the theater early and there's like little preview stuff playing, it would be a thing where it'd be like, I make movies. And it was like that type of deal. So that played across the entire country. And Scott Welch, who runs Mosaic in Grand Rapids, saw that, and then he reached out to me. So he reached out to me. He's like, I'm going to reach out to this guy and see if I can get him to come talk to these kids. I saw his email. I responded back. He wanted to fly me out to there, and I said, sure, I'll do that. And he was just shocked that I would do it. And I was like, no, I love speaking with kids, especially because I remember being in elementary school and people would come and show us stuff. And I still remember that. I'm going to be 42 this year, and I still remember stuff from like first or second grade, like just people showing a presentation. Whether or not I went into the field that they showed, I remember it. And it was important for me to see people like myself doing things, right? So I said, I can do this with kids. And I was like, let me go and do that. So I fly every year now. I've done it. I did it that first year. I prepared a presentation. It's usually only about 15, 20 minutes. go to it was at the Wealthy Theater in Grand Rapids, right? So I would go to the Wealthy Theater. They bus in all the schools, all the different schools, the high schools. So it's like usually about like 400 kids or something like that. And then they sit in the theater and they, there's all these professionals that come in and speak to them about their different career paths or their different jobs. So we had like sometimes like head of diversity at HBO. We had an accountant from, Monkey Paw. Like there's all these different people that just talk about their job. And so I'm one of them. But now I've consistently just made it a ritual. So I think this will be my 6th or 7th year going. Last year, we actually did a 9B one, which was really fun. So it was me and my other co-founder, Mike Uwandi. We got up there and started talking. And then in the middle of it, we surprised the kids with Aldous, who was off shooting at the time. He was on his press tour for Black Adam. So he got in there and he started talking to this like whole room of kids, and they were excited and asking him questions about different things. And he talked to them about acting and about process. So it's been a really fun thing. So I would say selfishly, yes, like that's one of the things that for me, that feels selfish for me, is I feel like I constantly get to go and talk to these kids, and I feel really excited about doing that. But I do it every year now.
That's incredible. And just a quick fun fact for everybody who's on the panel. There was one artist that was absolutely prolific, and he's still prolific. His name's I think it's Phillip Collins. I have to get the name right, and I apologize. It sounds like the singer, but he was a Black illustrator, painter, draftsman in Grand Rapids, Michigan. He happened to be friends with my mom. I don't know how that happened, but anyway, like, he was the guy that I looked at like, oh man, there's a dude that looks like me that's working in art, and he's doing things for museums and universities, and he's living in Mexico when it's cold, and in Michigan, and it comes to when it's warm, and he had like a whole like incredibly prolific career as an artist, and it's somebody worth looking up. It just just for artistic purposes, if you guys want to look it up, definitely do. Phil Collins, he's really, really dope. OG in my city as a painter, artist, illustrator. And when it comes to OGs, back to Chase, man, I want to quickly talk about Metal Face, like this new company you're about to form. I'm very excited about it. I know you are. Tell people what they can expect from Metal Face and what the stuff that's coming up in the future.
Well, it really is just a branding thing to kind of bring together all the stuff that I was influenced by, like the kind of the films that I mentioned before. I like to do all kinds of stuff. I like to do kid stuff. I like to do, teen stuff as well. Like all content, all ages, all genres. I can kind of find something that I can enjoy about it. But there are certain things that I want to make that are just love letters to the stuff that I was influenced by, and I'm a big Dr. Doom fan. I'm a big MF Doom fan. The reason I even chose Metal Face is because of MF Doom, because he put that's the MF aspect of it, right? But Dr. Doom to me is the illest because he's the second best at everything. So that means he's the best. Like he's the second best at everything. Like, so that means he's the best. He's the most well-rounded the most capable character. That's how I want to be as an artist. I want to be able to paint as well as the best painter. I want to be able to animate as good as the best animator. I want to be able to board as good as the best board artist. I want to be able to write as good as the best writer. And, and if in that pursuit, if I fall like right underneath a specialist, I feel like I'm doing all right. Right. So in that also too, Dr. Doom is a villain, right? Which is really there's just conflict because his motivations don't line up with the protagonist most of the time. But I say all that to say that it's more like it's an edgier content, right? So some of the stuff that we got to watch and I was influenced by, that content, it is a little edgy, but like thematically, visually, all that stuff that pocket and that period of anime that we love so much. And you don't see that in the mainstream that much anymore. If it's like the mainstream content that you see, it's typically the highest level stuff. It's like shonen stuff because it's sold and they've sold hundreds of millions of copies of Shonen Jump, or sold hundreds of million copies of whatever. So it's easy to adapt that stuff. And then you got the typical shonen storyline. But I want to make my own version of Vampire Hunter D. Not saying I want to make that specifically, but I want to make a love letter to that. I want to make a love letter to my favorite sci-fi stuff. And specifically, what Metal Face is like a vehicle to make like there's a pocket of anime that I really, and really it's because that was all I had. But the very first block of anime in the United States was Anime Saturdays on Sci-Fi Channel. That like it was like, you know, came on in the mid to late 90s. So on that I saw like New Dominion Tank Police, you know, I saw Patlabor War 2, I saw Ghost in the Shell, I saw Akira, I saw Cashern, I saw Shadow Skill, which is a deep cut. I saw Street Fighter 2. They used to play it all the time. So for some reason, I guess they had the rights to that. Fatal Fury, the motion picture, you know, all that stuff. So each one of those films represents something that I pulled from. That's kind of the way that I formed my taste. Like some of the effects animation I got from Obari, right, who directed Fatal Fury, the motion picture, and the way that he uses, you know, like really it's just about lenses and the way that the shapes, the specific shapes that he uses with his effect stuff. The staging I pulled from Ghost in the Shell, which I also saw in that, you know, the high contrast images, like how Kawajiri's films, kind of to Carl's point earlier, like Koike, right, who was his understudy for years, right? They make great images. Like even if it wasn't moving, it's a strong image because of several reasons. Not only the composition is typically the rule of thirds, it's in golden ratio, but the contrast of all of it as well. So yeah, it really is. It's a brand, right? So and then it's about trying to scale that to a point where I can make that stuff, and so it can live under the same kind of umbrella. So when you see that stuff coming from Metal Face, then you know exactly what you're getting. In the same sense that when I used to be super hyped because Manga Entertainment, which is a British company, was the main distributor of anime for the longest here in the States. And if I got like X the Movie, Ninja Scroll, there's so many films that fell under the Manga Entertainment, and the feeling that flaming logo gave me when it would pop up at the beginning of the VHS tape, that's exactly what I want to replicate. And I want to add to that legacy, you know. For the longest, I felt like I wanted to kind of branch out and recreate this and recreate that. But really, I feel honored to contribute to that legacy and add to it. And you know, and through my lens as well, you know. So that's kind of like my mission statement, you know. But it really is a place to create content with leads of color that exist and that can be considered, you know, equal to all that stuff, you know. So yeah, man, that's my goal. So instead of waiting, I just feel like I just want to do it, you know. I don't want to wait for money or anything like that. I'm just going to start creating these animatics and making animatics that you can enjoy and that you can that are sound designed and everything. So in case you just wanted to see it in animatic form, you could see it in that form, but it'll be so thought out that it's like at that point, if it gains traction, you know, and then, you know, we're looking for funding on various projects as well. So,
hey,
Carl, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, did you know that, I don't know if you knew, MF Doom did he did a lot of promos for the Boondocks first season, right? And yeah. And the reason why he did is because Adult Swim through this big concert, and they paid MF Doom a lot of money to show up, and he sent Hannibal Buress in a mask to perform.
In a mask, a Doombot.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the crowd, but he pulled it off for a little while, but then the crowd figured it out, and Adult Swim was pissed. He was so pissed, so he had to pay back that money somehow. So
that's hilarious.
He did a whole bunch of promos for them. He did Christmas promos. That's why the Danger Doom album came out. Because yeah.
So I didn't know that's why that was the story behind all the buffers. And to me, it was like discovering Mad Lib, you know, and all of that stuff is all wrapped up in that as well. So it just was so ill to me that's like also what he represents to me now as a creative in the scope of hip hop. You know, it was like at one point it took me understanding a little bit more as well. And then it's like also there's like a bunch of 5% stuff in there where I'm just like, oh, I didn't even understand that until I got older. And so you go back and you listen to the lyrics and it means something different, you know. So and it all kind of flows. It gives it all synergy, you know. It all feeds itself in that sense where it's like I want my work to have the effect that his music had. to have that lasting effect that his music had, the whole aspect of like reinventing yourself, right? Like him, what he existed as before, and then he put a mask on and became a whole other entity and had a whole other career. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's all that. And so yeah, you know, I'm looking forward to it. And for me, it is Metal Face is also, it's like this is the name that I've given this stage of my career, because when I first, so for instance, when I first got started, you know, I was, you know, just kind of working, especially, you know, coming from where we come from, I feel like I was just struggling to get a job. So I wasn't having fun. I was making sure I was working good enough. My work was good enough to get a job. I wasn't never exploring like the ideas that I wanted to create. You know, I was when I was in high school, but towards like 11th grade, 12th grade, you know, you're gearing up and I'm like, am I going to go to college for this? I don't think so. I need to try to start getting good enough to get a job. Then you get so focused on that you lose sight of like why you got into it in the first place. And, you know, I kind of had a taste of like, so Black Dynamite, for instance, that was the first project where I was able to pull cultural references. Like Carl was like, draw this, draw that. And it's like, oh, I know exactly what that is, but into specificity. It's like, oh, you know, I could pull obscure references, but it didn't feel that way. It felt like I was just kind of manifesting what my life experience was on the page. But then shortly after that, I realized like, oh man, it was a 10-year window since when I was able to do that again. Talking about, you know, not much change being in the industry. And yeah, there are certain projects, but until George Floyd, there weren't opportunities to pursue that. You know, the only other experience I had, ironically, is Carl gave me my shot on Black Dynamite. 10 years later, I got to work with Aaron on the Boondocks reboot. That was the only other time where it was like the ease of like, he'd be like, yo, I want to create this guy that dresses this dude that dresses like 90s New York, but today, like he still dresses like he's from that era. And it's like, what you want him to wear? You know, like a Helly Hansen, you know what I mean? That kind of stuff, an AV, and all these random things where I could immediately pull that up because that was the era. I understood. I remember that. I didn't even have to think about it, you know? And I want to recreate that again as well, you know, but for other people, you know what I mean? And be a vehicle for that. So, you know, I'm always chasing that opportunity, man. And, you know, I think that, yeah, it's going to be cool. It's going to be cool. I'm just trying to I just want to make iconic stuff. You know, I want my stuff to stand the test of time, you know?
Absolutely. I think every single person on this panel is reaching that, and that's within the near future, if not already. And, you know, we're at the time. It's 9:30, everybody, West Coast time. On want to just quickly say thank you guys so much for taking your time to be a part of this panel, to share your experiences, your stories, and your insight about Black in animation. Being a Black creator in this space, costume designing, movies, film, music videos, everything that Phil has done is absolutely incredible. Please check out 9B Entertainment. Please check out Metal Face and everything that Chase is doing. Please check out Carl Jones and Martian Blueberry and Super Dope. Now, just to close this out, if everybody could go through and just say their social medias where people can find them online and how they can follow and support your projects.
I'll go first. I don't have many places you can find me. I'm on Instagram, Saint Chase. I'm Saint Chase on everything. So I should be the only Saint Chase that pops up when you search stuff. Somebody got my my domain name. I was a little heated about it. So I'm Saint Chase on Instagram. On Twitter though, I am D Chase Conley. Yeah, that's probably the only place you can find my stuff right now, because I do so much NDA work that I can't really show anything. So I just kind of keep it under wraps for now. But we're launching, you know, I'll have Metal Face ink up the site soon enough.
Yeah. And yeah, you can find me on Twitter at I am Carl Jones. You can find me on Instagram at I am Carl Jones. And you can find me on TikTok at I am Carl Jones, but I haven't made any posts yet. And Super Dope is coming soon. And Martian Blueberry's Twitter page is We Are Martian B. And by the way, that name Martian Blueberry, it was a creative way of saying strange fruit, you know, because people always ask me, why? What is that? Martian Blueberry. Like, it was so weird.
Yeah.
I want to find an interesting way of saying strange fruit.
Oh, that's dope.
Yeah.
I am Phil underscore Boutte on Instagram, and then P Boutte on Twitter. And then we have 9bcollective.com. And like my name's really unique. It's like you can't miss it. So if you search it, my art station is there and a few other things. It is Boutte. Like as unfortunate as that is my last name. I think it's one of those things where people are like, am I saying it right? And I'm like, if it's not funny, you're saying it wrong. So that's pretty much what it is. But you can find me on those platforms as well. So yeah.
Well, this concludes today's programming for the Schaumburg Black Comic Book Festival. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Thanks to all the audience members for watching. There's tons of more exciting programs at schaumcom.org. That's SCHOMCOM.org. You can listen to this panel over and over again if you want, which I know I'm going to be doing. We have past panels from last year, as well as live live recorded panels from previous events at the Schaumburg. So please, if you guys are in the New York City, come and see us live April 14th through 15th. And that's it. Thank you guys so much for joining us. And gentlemen, thank you again so much for your time. Hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day, your April Easter weekend. And I hope to see y'all again real soon.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
No doubt.
All right. I'll see you, Phil. Chase.
Later.
Peace.